Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of Wealth Bites. If you're working in tech, mid to late 30s, maybe early 40s with a decent income, RSUs are starting to vest on your schedule, and you're probably at that point where money's starting to build up, but things are also getting a little bit more complex. You are making really good money, and tax bills are brutal because you're progressing in your career, you're making some bonuses, etc. You're also holding some company stock. Depends on how long have you stayed with your company. And also, you're not sure when to sell. You're seeing this market fluctuations and trying to think, oh, do I sell? Do I not? Do I buy more? Do I get some of the ESPPs, etc.? And that's really not helpful, especially when you're trying to build a long-term vision about, working optional at some stage. Most of my clients wants to work optional by age 50 or 55, or you're starting something on your own. I've got those clients who, join together and make their startup because they're really, really interested in their software or their app or whatever that is. But there's no plan really to get there. And that's the main issue. And then to top it all off, there is a ton of misinformation floating around. So you wake up in the morning, you check your email and you find 4 or 5 emails from I don't know who, and you don't know this information. Is it relevant? Is it not? It's just, sales pitch everywhere. You go to your Instagram reel or your Facebook reel, you find, all these ads, and if you search for one thing on Google, that's it, you're done. Everything is coming your way about what you searched about. So it's really not helping in the digital clutter that you're having around you. So today I want to walk you through 5 of the biggest money myth I see smart people in tech believe because of all this misinformation and the lack of clarity in their plans. And these are the myths that sound, kind of true, and people usually tend to believe it until they cost you real money and you just realize, no, it's not true. It's just, myth. Okay. So basically, I'll start with the number one myth, which is, very popular these days: politics and how it drives the stock market. Okay. So who's in office will make or break the market. And that is completely wrong. We have all heard this election season rolls around and everyone becomes a stock market guru. If the coalition wins, you buy this. If the Labour wins, you sell everything. If the US swings left, it's going to tank tech and stock market, etc. And we have all seen how, people in the office like Trump impacts the market and how these impacts can change your investment plan. So look, I get it. Politics feels like it should matter, but let me, hit you with some numbers. I like to work with numbers and, evidence-based talks. That's what I really like. So if you have invested $1,000 in the Australian market, ASX, in 1950, and only stayed invested during coalition government. So, you stay invested when the coalition is winning the government, and then you sell when the Labour is in the government or whatever that is. $1,000 will turn out to be $1.2 million since the 1950. If you like to stay invested in the Labour in office, then the $1,000 will become $800,000. So there's a difference between both. But if you stay invested throughout the whole period, and that's the interesting part, and regardless of which party is ruling the government, that same $1,000 will become $2.5 million. So it's really doesn't really count who's in office. There's a bit of a complex calculation behind these numbers. I know some of you will be asking, how did you come up with this number? There's a complex numbers around that. So it is calculated based on, ups and downs of the market. Some years did 20%, some years did 10%. So it's not really kind of an average kind of calculation, because some of people would be saying, if the market is doing 10% per year, this is not really the number. No, I assure you this has been, checked a few times. So there is a massive difference between both approaches. And the reason why is because markets don't run on politics really. They run on profits, they run on economies, and how people wants to make the economy work. And business fundamentals, earnings, productivity, innovations, efficiencies, all this sort of stuff doesn't really impact businesses and doesn't really impact stock markets. There are some factors that impact the stock market on the short term, but really the stock market throughout history have proved to us that investments and stock market, they overcome any kind of waves of change, if you like. And I have a very quick story to share with you guys today. I had a client who was a head of product at some kind of a fintech. Super sharp guy, super sharp. Right before the 2022 federal election, he pulled out a large portion of his portfolio, and he was convinced that a market correction is coming. And that's what he thought at the time before, working with me. And what happened is that the market didn't really crash, and he missed a 6.5% run over the following quarter. So if you had, $100,000. This is another $6,000 or $7,000 in your portfolio just in 3 months. So it cost him like 90K in growth, in overall growth, if you do the math for it. So I think the main takeaway from this is don't try to outguess politics. Build a long-term plan. Stay invested. The market reward patience, not predictions. If you outpatient everyone, you will win 100%. There's no argument about that. So yeah, that's about the first one about, politics on the market. The second one is a company, stock, and, how your company stock is your best investment. And this is what most tech professionals think, unfortunately. So, my company stock is my best investment. This is the biggest mistake you will do. You love where you work. I get it. You believe in the mission. You're really emotionally invested. You're probably wearing the hat and the cap and your t-shirt and everything. But look, it's awesome to be aligned with your company. But the problem is concentration risk. And that is a very, very big risk. So if 60-70% of your net worth is tied to one stock and that stock is your employer, how safe does that really feel? Even the biggest names, Meta or Tesla, have seen drops of 40% or more, up to 70% in recent years. And most individual stocks don't really outperform. In fact, 96 of all listed stocks underperform the market over time. You really need to think about that. I recently had a meeting with a client and she was saying, I work in X company, I can't mention the name, and they have done 800% since the company was incepted. And I was thinking to sell my house and put all the money in this company. And she only has her house. She's got no more assets except superannuation and some minimal savings. I'm going to sell my house and take the money, put it in the company. And then in 10 years, it's going to do another, 200 or 300%. And I'm going to buy multiple properties, etc. I was like, oh, okay. And what if the market, if the share price of the company went down by 50% or 60%? How would you feel? She's just silent. She couldn't respond. She said, I see your point. It doesn't work like that. I said, yes, exactly. It doesn't really work like that. So you need to be very careful with this concentration risk. So you need to think about what other options you can have, and there are multiple options. I've had a client last year, an engineering lead at one of the US tech firms in Sydney office. He came to me with $1.1 million of RSUs, 80% of his entire wealth, if you believe it, guys. He was emotionally tied to it. He said, I know this company better than anyone. It's still early on. We got this huge potential, etc. But what I said, look, hear me out. Let me do some testing for you in the portfolio. Let me stress test the performance of your portfolio and align it or match it with your goal. He wanted to retire at a specific age, and we stress tested the portfolio. And the surprise is for him, but for me, is that if the stock dropped only by 30%, just 30%, his early retirement plans got pushed back 6 years. That's really the impact. So we had to build a different selling strategy, and we rebalanced the investments. And 18 months later, the stock did drop to 25%, and he'd already taken gains off the table, reallocated, avoided the hit of the share price. We sold it in a strategic way, and we, minimized the tax on the sales, because that's a big concern, obviously. But the thing is, he is on track. That is the most important part, is that he is on track of retirement goal and retirement age. So I think the main takeaway is don't fall in love with your company stock. It's fine to hold some. You will get some every month or every quarter, but have limits. Diversification isn't a lack of conviction. It's actually protection. So it is the smart thing to do.
So miss number 3 is, if I sell my company stock, I'll miss on the big upside. So look, let's talk about one of the biggest mental blocks I see with tech professionals. And holding company stock and the fear of missing out is one of the biggest mental blocks that I see with my tech professional clients. And the one, but what if it takes off right after I sell? And that's the very common question that I always get asked. And I think it is a very valid question, and it's a valid fear as well. But no one wants to be that person who sold at $80 only to watch it, skyrocket to $150 or $200. That is totally understandable. But here is what people often forget. Selling some of your company stock doesn't mean you're out of the game completely. It just means you're not gambling your entire future on one company's share price. And that's the one thing you want to avoid. So if you still got unvested RSUs and you're still getting equity, and if you're an ESPP as well with a discount baked in that, that's more upside coming your way. And there is a lot of potential. And unless you sell every single share, you'll still benefit if the stock rises. But the part no one talks about, if the stock drops, you're not the one holding the bag anymore. And this isn't about timing the market. It's about reducing risk, buying some peace of mind, and actually using the wealth you are building to improve your life. Not just watch numbers go up on a screen. It gives you more certainty and more confidence of what the future looks like for you. So, if you're sitting on a big chunk of company stocks and, having this kind of FOMO and don't know where to go, you can map out a strategy that balances growth and protection. Because building real wealth is not just about the upside, it's about making sure the downside doesn't knock you off the track of your plan. And that's a very important part of having someone to work with you, to make sure that your plan is going ahead regardless of what changes happen in the background. And myth number 4 is that the company or your company will be withholding enough tax on your RSUs. And that is a very big misconception. There is a trap in that. I see smart people walk into this all the time. They think that the company have withheld their RSU tax already, and they think they're all good to go. And probably they won't be. And I hate seeing people caught off guard by this, because the fix is so simple. If you know it's coming, if you're a high earner, and let's face it, most of my clients in tech are, your real marginal tax could be 45 or 47% or sometimes even higher. So most companies, they only withhold the default amount, which is usually around 32%. They don't account for other, things like RSUs or additional bonuses. If they do, good on them. If they don't, this is where the problem happens. So if your RSU vests and you don't do anything else, the tax shortfall, and then July hits and you're staring down a surprise tax bill in tens of thousands of dollars. It's not fun, especially if the stock is down or you have spent some of the RSU money already. The other day, a client was saying, I've received this, tax return, and I got some $3,000. I gave it to my wife and she went and spent it. And then the next week I received a letter from the ATO and say, hey, you owe us X amount of money. He was like, what? I just spent the money. And that's a very usual kind of thing that happened with my clients. So the good news is it's totally avoidable. You can avoid this kind of pickle. You just need to plan ahead and run some projections, set aside extra cash if needed. Make sure that your tax planning is something that is done proactively, not reactively. When you do it proactively, you are on the top of the game, but when you're doing reactively, just using an accountant or something, there's nothing really you can do. You just have to keep paying your tax debt, and that's pretty stressful. So if you're unsure what your RSU vesting might mean or tax time, I think it's time for you to get ahead of this and make sure that the year tax doesn't feel like a punch in your face. And the last one we're going to talk about today is myth number 5, is I don't need insurance or estate planning yet. And that is a very, very big misconception. I know this one won't be popular, but it's very, very important. It is the foundation of everything you do today, tomorrow, and for the next, 20 or 30 years. And I would like to talk about the, insurance and estate planning in like a separate episode or something, but I'm just gonna, touch the surface of the topic today. Obviously, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email or send me a message. It's not a switch off. I know some people, ignore it and put it at the bottom of their to-do list. But if you're in your 30s or 40s and earning very well, fit and healthy, this stuff feels unnecessary. I know, like a problem for future you, not for current me now. You think you're bulletproof, and these things, are very important to be looked after. So the truth is, bad stuff doesn't send calendar invites. You will not know ahead of time that there is, something bad coming your way. And financial fallouts doesn't care how much you earn if you're not protected. I've seen it too many times. Someone gets sick, they get in a serious accident or worse, and suddenly the whole financial foundation their family was counting on is gone. And that's a big problem. So if you're today having all these problems in work, in life, with family, with friends, with kids, all these problems, you're looking after all these problems and thinking about all these problems and trying to solve. But once you have an accident or a medical problem, you only have one problem, and you better make sure that this problem is sorted for you. It's very important. So the basic personal insurance can cover your income and your debts and make sure your family is okay no matter what happens. And I know some of the tech companies offer their employees a multiple of their salary as an insurance, but they're potentially most of the time there are some gaps in this insurance. So it is very important to understand what are your insurance needs and whether this is covered in the policies that you get. Usually the insurance policies inside Super is not the best. It's better than nothing, obviously, but there's a lot of, problems with claiming when it comes to claiming, and the reputation is not that great. So make sure that you have an insurance policy that gets paid if something happens, because the last thing you want is an insurance policy that is not paid in a time of a financial or health distress. And now, once this is covered, we need to look at the estate planning, and it's about protecting your choices and making sure that, all your family and financial affairs are looked after by the right people. So who looks after your kids, who makes decisions if you can't. It's not just for old, retiree, dying people. It is for responsible adults who care about what happens if life takes a turn. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not, it's not the best topic to discuss, but it's seriously powerful. And once it's done, you don't have to think about it again for years. So please, please, please make sure your estate planning and insurance are sorted, because your future, you will thank you. That's what I would like to say. So if you have been putting this off, look, no judgment, but really now is the time. Let's get that sorted so you can move on with life knowing it's all taken care of behind the scene. So look, to wrap it up today, I want to zoom out for a second and just explain that when it comes to building wealth, most people think the goal is to make all the right moves all the time and picking the perfect shares or stocks and nail the timing, optimize every decision. But in reality, that's not how it works. The way it works is that the biggest wins don't come from chasing upside. It actually comes from avoiding the big obvious mistakes that set you back for years. I've got a mate, he's a very smart guy who lost his car a few years ago. Not in an accident, he just forgot to renew his insurance. That's it really. One slip, Alden's gone. And same goes with money. It's not about being perfect. It's about being prepared, being proactive. You don't have to know all the answers. You just need to avoid the big traps like holding too much company stocks or ignoring tax planning or thinking estate planning is a later thing. Avoid those and you are already ahead of 90% of the people, let me tell you. So if you're building wealth and want to avoid these silent threats that could quietly undo it, let's chat. You know how to reach out to me. You've got my email, you've got my LinkedIn page or Facebook or whatever. It's not about making things more complex. It's about having more clarity and confidence about the future and making sure that these few smart moves now can save you a lot of regret years down the track. I hope you've enjoyed your time today with this episode, and I'll catch you later. Thank you.